Let's recap. Smart, handsome, iced coffee swilling Cypher bounty hunter, yours truly, gets into altercation with fellow Cypher terrorist. Your boy gets blown through a wall and nearly dies. Terrorist is declared dead. Then, werewolf sister goes alpha on a pack of vampires and saves a club full of people, gets herself arrested in the process. Strike a deal with lawyer to rescue his sister and to get werewolf sister back from the clink. In the process, pick up a possible ally / past enemy in the form of powerhouse half-orc hottie Reaver. Underground boxing champ and ex-gang enforcer, wicked fighter and definitely into me. Have a legendary showdown with a bunch of crazy witches in a magical jungle, save the girl, get other girl, kinda, then get cock-blocked by a major terror attack by aforementioned terrorist. All in all, ruining any hopes of a good night's sleep. Everyone up to speed? Good. Welcome to my world of blood, sweat and steel. This is Cyphers Edge. The return journey from the garden felt like it took forever. One thing that was clear in my mind was the list of missed calls that had popped up as soon as I'd got decent reception outside the magical field of the garden. I managed to negotiate one of the cars off Jarrow that the hunting party had left behind. We needed the extra seat and they didn't need it at all. I'd spoken to Shaky and Les. The vibe in the city right now was straight up panic. Thousands dead or injured. The police had, thanks to Les insisting, looked at the footage from my encounter in the apartment building. They had come to the same conclusion as I had. Well, sort of. They were calling it a copycat terrorist. I knew the truth though. I could feel it in my bones. The stranger was back. The elusive terrorist I'd thought dead, but deep down I'd known he never truly could have been. It hadn't seemed right. Something had niggled at me at the time, but with all the lines of investigation dead, I had dropped it. Now, the case was definitely reopened. I knew the other reason they had called it a copycat, and it was pissing me off. I had called up Rio and swore, probably too much. Sam had looked shocked at me as she sat in the passenger seat listening to me unload on Rio. My handler took it like a champ. Reva, who was riding in front of us, very surely heard my thoughts on the matter through our one-way telepathic link. With my magical connection to her emotions, I felt her anxiety peak in response. Okay, so maybe I was going a little bit overboard, but I was tired and in no right frame of mind to rein in my emotions. Sam tried to break the tension that was my silent rage.
So this guy, who's meant to be dead, he's responsible for the bombings?
She asked as I hung up on Rio and sat there brooding. I shook my head in frustration. It never sat well with me when they ID'd the body. Les and I thought it sounded like a cop-out at the time.
So you think he's the same guy? Why wouldn't the cops recognize it as a possibility?
I know it is, and the reason they aren't is to get around the lockdown on this case and exclude having to get me involved. My case was under federal jurisdiction. This kind of gets them around the red tape I put in place.
Cops and hunters don't get on well then, huh?
I grimaced. Well, one cop in particular. I knew Hammond was behind this. I could just see him trying his best to shut me out of this case. Well, we'd see about that. I didn't need his help or his mustache. The rest of the drive consisted of long silences between another couple of calls. One to Fia to let her know that I wasn't dead. That was a short one, but it was good to hear her voice. I promised to fill her in on everything as soon as possible. The other was to Sam's lawyer brother. He was almost in tears when he heard her voice. We arranged to drop her off on the way back to the apartment. It was a short visit on my part. Reva did most of the talking. I was somewhat distracted by the bombings, trying to come up with the first lines of inquisition. The lawyer's house was on the outskirts down by the water in Fremantle, and I could see smoke illuminated by the city lights from his driveway. I stood, half listening to Reva recap the guy. He wept as he scooped his little sister up in his arms. Sam seemed as surprised by his reaction as she was to be home. I spared enough time to consider his newfound devotion and wondered how long it would last. Cynical, maybe. I guess time would tell. Despite all the chaos around the city, he promised to get Fia's case done the next day. He said with everything happening right now, it might actually make things easier to get her out. People had bigger problems than a werewolf right now. It was a longer drive home than it would usually have been. Streets were closed. Whole districts were on lockdown. From the distance of parallel streets and bridges, I could witness the destruction firsthand. Rubble lay scattered everywhere. The emergency service airdrop vehicles hovered over the destruction. Thrusters a low hum audible even from this distance. Lights scanning the debris for survivors. After a couple of checkpoints and one showing of my badge, we managed to get into the heart of the city. We dropped Reva's bike off at the lockup that she had and took the car back to my place. I parked it up in the street, grabbed our bags out and made the slog up to my apartment. I couldn't think of the last time I'd been this relieved to see my little hole in the wall. Reva dropped her bag on the floor next to the door and sighed with relief.
Despite everything, I'm just glad to be back somewhere safe.
I didn't respond straight away. My mind was trying to come up with sarcastic comments and logical arguments all at once, and I decided not to reply at all. I was too tired to be witty, and wit wasn't my strong suit anyway. It was pointless, she knew, but she had the decency to pretend. What even is safe right now? She took off her jacket, draping it over a chair.
If nowhere is safe, here's as good a place as any.
She walked back past me as she headed to the bathroom, pausing just long enough to lean in and kiss me on the cheek.
I'm gonna go clean off. Then I think we could both use some rest.
I was on edge. I was only still standing because I had no idea where to start. I have to do something. I can't just curl up and go to sleep. She stopped at the door of the bathroom, leaning on the frame.
You're about to fall over. Shit, we haven't even had a proper meal. You want to go off chasing ghosts? You're no good to anyone if you're half awake and starving.
She was right, of course. We hadn't stopped for a rest since the night before, in that cell deep in the stone walls of Warcliffe. We'd only taken a couple of handfuls of snacks when we left Jarrow's fort. Sam had eaten most of mine. She raised an eyebrow in expectation.
Go get some food. We'll eat, then we sleep.
I nodded vaguely. Yeah, food. I walked to the fridge as Reva turned on the shower. She had left the door open, and I could hear the water falling to the tiled floor and then the hush as she stepped under the flow. I looked down at a half dozen iced coffees in the door of the fridge. That's the good stuff, I thought, reaching out for one on autopilot.
No caffeine!
Reva's voice rang out from the shower.
You want to sleep, remember?
I rolled my eyes and grabbed some leftover takeaway instead. Yes, mother, I muttered.
I heard that.
I went to sleep with the sound of sirens, the deep thrum of the air vehicles, the glow of fires still burning. I didn't even remember when I finally dropped into the blissful realm of Morpheus. I woke up to Reva, one arm over my chest, snoring lightly in my ear. This time, unlike back at the fort the first night, I enjoyed her presence, properly, knowing that there was actually something there. Yeah, sure, I distracted myself from possible romantic relationships in the past. I told myself it was to keep them safe. My work was too risky. But as I lay there taking in the smell of her hair and feeling the comfortable weight of her cybernetic arm on my chest, she could handle herself. Maybe I could build on this. She hadn't said anything last night. She just climbed into the bed next to me, stolen half the blankets, and gone to sleep. I gently extradited myself from her embrace, eventually, padded across the room and closed the door as quietly as I could. I looked at the time in the corner of my vision. My heads-up display, minimal for this time of day. Weather, time, 4 messages, 2 missed calls. I ignored the details of the last 2 items. It was too early, mentally, to deal with those. I hadn't even drank my breakfast yet. The fridge gave up the goods. At long last, I gulped down mouthfuls of sweet caffeinated relief. Riva was asleep, and I reflected that due to the lack of getting any recently, this was better than sex. I just polished off bottle number 1, popped open a second, when there was a sharp rapping of knuckles on my door. I froze, bottle resting on my lips. The intercom for the entrance to the building hadn't sounded. Whoever it was had let themselves in, or they'd been let in. I linked to the camera on the door, and I couldn't believe it. Elated, and not even questioning how, or probably the more important question of why, I raced to the door, opening it without a thought. Fear stood in the hallway, standing free, clean, smiling in fresh clothes. Behind her were 3 of the biggest, toughest looking elves I'd ever seen. They had security written all over them. I stood in the doorway, stunned. I was actually speechless. Damn, that lawyer worked fast. Fear threw herself into my arms. I pulled her in tight, wrapping my arms almost completely around her tiny frame. "You're back," I stammered at last. "How?" Fear pulled back from my embrace and stepped to one side. As she did so, a gap opened up in the wall of bodyguards and admitted the last person I'd expected to see. Sierra Tolomine was framed in my doorway. She was dressed in a perfectly fitted pantsuit, her hair loose over her shoulder, the tips of her pointy ears poking through them. White blouse buttoned up with a silk tie. Tall, elegant, and eyes as cold as a glacier. Her smile, on the other hand, was on the surface a picture of warmth and welcome. "Commander Whitlock." She held out one dainty, manicured hand. "A pleasure to meet you." On instinct, I grasped it. I was surprised at the strength in her grip. Not brute strength, but firm, unwavering. "Miss Tolomine, what, I stuttered to the end of my sentence. My brain was still waking up. The first coffee hadn't even kicked in yet. "I'm sorry, I just woke up. Please come in." I suddenly became apparent that I was standing in front of one of the most influential she-elves in the entire state, in a pair of shorts. Well, at least I'd put shorts on. Would you excuse me for a moment?" I didn't wait for a reply, turning on my heel and retreating to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leant against it, taking in a couple of shallow breaths as I thought over the bizarre start to the day. Riva was still asleep. That was something. One explanation to one person at a time. I pulled on my least creased shirt that didn't smell of mold. When I re-emerged, Fear was seated at our tiny dining table, a cup of what I assumed to be coffee in front of her, and Sierra. One of the 3 bodyguards must have remained in the hallway. One was by the door, and the other was standing just behind the she-elf. I pulled up a chair and seated myself between the 2 drastically different women. Where one would be called slim, the other would be called thin. One had long platinum hair, the other short, white, and disheveled. Fear gave off vibes of a predator, even when she wasn't in wolf form. But the she-elf was casually unconcerned, and at the same time giving off an aura of superiority. I wasn't surprised. From what I'd heard about her, she definitely thought highly of herself. As I'd crossed the room, I'd given both her guards a casual scan. And while I was impressed with what the big guys were packing, I was stunned at how little she had in the way of augmentations. Nothing more than cranial upgrades and subdermal armor, not the same grade as mine, that would have been too bulky, but enough to keep her safe in unexpected situations. Fear slid my second bottle of iced coffee towards me. The first one was now starting to kick in. I wiped my hand over the tabletop as if smoothing out invisible creases. "Sorry about that." She smiled gently. "It's not a problem. Your sister has made us quite comfortable." I raised an eyebrow at Fear. "Well, we don't often have guests. Unfortunately, I can't even vouch for the quality of the coffee." She gave me another one of those smiles that didn't quite make it up to her eyes. "Again, not a problem." I caught my breath, deciding how to move forward, and decided I may as well dive right in. "I don't mean to be rude, but can I just ask, what the hell's going on here?" I looked between the 2 of them. Fear shrugged. "You've got me."
1 minute I'm getting ready for some yard time, the next I'm being told I'm pardoned.
She glanced from me to Sierra.
I thought you organized this, she said, starting to look confused.
We both settled our gazes on Sierra. She lifted the cup of coffee to her lips, took a longer sip than I would have expected, and settled the cup down perfectly.
I really should apologize. I'm afraid I've been rather secretive up to a point. It was very deceptive of me, really, but a lady has to get her kicks somehow.
She looked down at her cup and adjusted its position slightly.
Though, since we're being forward, I obviously have a motive for this gesture, Commander. I need your help.
I held up a hand. You don't have to be so formal. Ulf will do fine. She raised an eyebrow, as though this was a concession she was making.
Well, Mr. Whitlock, as I said, I need your help, and I thought the best way to get on your good side was to deliver Fia here, home from her injustice with the DCP.
Fia spoke up.
So what, you want to hire him?
She gave a small chuckle.
Not that I'm not grateful, but springing me is a bit on the extreme side just to arrange a meeting.
Sierra tilted her head, conceding the point.
True, though from what I hear, Miss Whitlock, you and your brother are the reason he's so successful in his profession. When I hire you, I want him to be at full strength.
Look, I cut in as politely as I could. Whatever the job is, I would sincerely like to take it on. But you might have noticed, it's chaos out there. I already have a job.
The man in the helmet.
Her tone was level and calm. I blinked, surprised. Yeah, how did you...
I believe we do indeed hold the same objective.
Fia and I exchanged glances. She continued.
Ever since the bombing at the apartment block that nearly cost you your life, I've been looking into your cases with some interest. I also put out some feelers into the local police force, and I know they are trying to exclude you from your own investigation.
They can't exclude me. My case is locked down at a federal level, I interjected. She held up a hand in a calming gesture.
Of course. However, they can start their own investigation now, as this has been claimed to be a copycat. Your target died after all. Case closed.
I ground my teeth, but I didn't respond. Best not to show anger in front of a client.
But you and I know that's not true, don't we?
I didn't want to be rude, but this was skirting around one question I wanted to answer to.
Why are you getting involved?
Fia asked the question before I could open my mouth. I raised my eyebrows. Yeah, what she said. Sierra nodded.
Fair question. To be blunt, I'm trying to change this city for the better. I can't have a loose cannon rocking the boat. A madman like this, he threatens the entire population, as is evident from recent events. I need you to take him out. You're the only one who's had contact with him, or even gotten close.
And if we're being blunt, it's a feather in your cap come election time if you're the woman behind the man that caught him. I saw the bodyguard tense up, trying to stare me down through his sunglasses, but Sierra didn't seem bothered by my accusation.
I won't lie. It would look good for me. She paused, her face taking an expression of genuine concern. Don't get me wrong, I genuinely want to catch this asshole. I have worked too hard and too long to see my people suffer at the hands of a madman. I'm not just offering to back you financially. You will have my complete, unwavering support. The entire support of my household.
I took in a deep breath. Considering I was already going to do this anyway, I can't really say no. I won't lie, it would be nice to have some decent connections and research assets for a change. She smiled wide.
It's agreed then.
She drew an NFC card from her jacket pocket and passed it across the table with 2 fingers.
My personal contact details and a small bonus to get you started.
Without waiting for a reply, she got to her feet, smoothing out her clothes.
I must go now. Unfortunately, I have some politicians to poke in the back.
She held out a hand to each of us in turn.
Thank you for the coffee. I hope we shall talk soon.
Without any ceremony, she turned for the front door. I got to my feet to see her and the bodyguards out. The door closed, and I stood there staring at the blank panel.
That was the most interesting meeting we've had in ages,
Fia said thoughtfully. I stared at the blank panel ahead of me. Yeah.
Nice of her to spring me, though.
Yeah. My mind was trying to turn over the conversation again, in case I'd missed any details.
Kinda makes all your work down in the garden a bit pointless, though.
Yeah. There was a moment of silence, Fia's words going in one ear and coming out the other. I was considering my next move.
Or not. Hello?
I turned at her change of tone. Reva was standing in the doorway to my bedroom. She looked in every way like she'd just woken up. Her hair a mess, eyes bleary, wearing a lot less than last time we shared a bed.
Oh, hi.
Reva looked to me, her brain still in neutral, then pointed to Fia.
Please tell me this is your sister.
Fia smiled. She held up the hand that didn't hold her coffee and gave a tiny wave. Yeah, Reva, Fia, Reva. Reva looked down at her body as if noticing it for the first time. Embarrassment rushed her mind at last.
And I'm barely in my underwear.
She turned on the spot and ducked back into my bedroom. Fia raised her eyebrows over the top of her mug as she took a sip. She lowered the cup and whispered,
I'll give you this, bro. You got good taste.
I rolled my eyes and returned to the fridge, remembering before I got there that there was now no food. Thanks. What would I do without your approval? I didn't want to leave Reva alone with Fia just yet, mostly because I was worried what they'd talk about with me gone. So we ordered delivery for breakfast. We sat around the table eating the first decent meal in days for all three of us. I tossed the NFC card in the air and caught it as I chewed. It had indeed held her personal details and a transfer code for $20,000.
That's a lot of scratch,
Reva said around a mouthful of bacon and eggs. It's almost too much, I said slowly.
It's very generous. We could definitely use it.
Fia was right, but I hadn't done anything yet. It made me feel uneasy. I wasn't used to this kind of generosity.
Well, what's our first move then?
Les will be busy. I'll call Rio at some point and get her to pull any info out of the cops that she can. Best play it by the book for now. I grimaced and sucked in a breath between gritted teeth. As for the first step, same one I always take. Fia looked sheepish.
The goblin.
The goblin. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. New episodes uploaded every second Saturday. Script and narration by JJ Brandis. Music was provided by Cale McLeish. Copyright JJ Brandis 2025.